we go. It is live. Thank you for coming on the show, Andy. I got to start out with a question. Who is your favorite superhero?
Ooh, my favorite superhero, I think, would have to be Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
I think I like the fact that he's just like a average dude who kind of was not that cool in school, and then got through kind of science. I'm a science geek, so I
Hell
like
yeah.
that it's kind of like a scientific radioactive spider that then turned him into, and then that he ended up doing good things with his power. So
Totally.
he's
Plus, he's like incredibly strong.
yeah, and it just like it looks like it would be so much fun to be able to swing from. I mean, flying would be fun too. All superheroes have awesome, but that one in particular just looks like it would be so cool in the
Yeah.
movies. So
Oh yeah.
so
Every
that's
time
up there.
they
But I
always.
always wonder what happens, after he's done like swinging around. Like what happens to all those spider webs that he
Yeah.
sees like hanging off all the buildings. Some guy has to go clean all those up or something, probably,
He,
right?
yeah. He's got an intern. The intern's like, God damn it.
Yeah, sure.
It's
Yeah.
like, why was it that high up, dude? You had to hit the highest building in the whole
Come
place.
on, man. Can't we make a rule? 40 stories is the limit. You can't swing from anything more than 40 stories. Right on.
Yeah, but awesome. So Spider-Man, going into that story kind of that you just went through, the person who in school didn't think they were as cool, used science, was learning all that. Is that where your story begins, or how did you start in all of what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, I guess I, I really kind of came across like all the self improvement and self development stuff when I was kind of in high school, and maybe that's why I identify it as it wasn't a radioactive spider for me, but I was kind of the not so cool kid. I was the geek in high school, I guess, into kind of drama and student council and stuff like that. And yeah, kind of finding the self development and self improvement, and really all those tapes and CDs from the 80s and stuff, like really like kind of jump started my life to really thinking, what can I create and contribute to the world, and what kind of life do I want to build for myself. And so I guess now then, what I ended up with is this website and podcast that I do talking to teens, and I'm a researcher, and what I study is parent-teen communication. So kind of helping through kind of like removing it by one generation, giving parents the tools so that they can like hopefully help other teenagers who are maybe struggling like I was to find something positive in their life. And so that's where I'm at now, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. So then we'll just dive right into that. So when you're helping a parent learn more about their kids and understanding how they're going to work, what do you dive into? How do you do that? And how do you really get their mindset to be like, hey, like your kid is a person too? And if you don't realize that, it's going to be a lot harder to be the parent with them.
Uh, I think that like a lot of times parents come to me and it's like what they want to do is just tell me all these things that are wrong. It's like, okay, so hey, what do you need help with? And it's like, well, oh my gosh, my teenager, I can't. He's doing this, he's doing that, and like I can't get him to. And it's like this laundry list um, of things, and they'll even they've like figured out like it kind of started when he started hanging out with these kids, and then I found this in his backpack, and the vaporizer was the first thing, and now it's progressed, and now I'm finding the weed, and I'm not sure what to do about that, and they've kind of got this like whole story about centered about like but it's always in terms of like all these things that are wrong with the teenager, problems with the teenager, and so I can't really I'm not talking to the teenagers, so I can't really help with that. And I think for most people, it's like if we try to focus on what we want to change in other people, it's not really useful in our life because
Mm-hmm.
we can't change other people. All we can really focus on is ourselves. So the first thing I try to do is help parents to see that and to say, okay, let's just set that aside. Like I understand that there's things that you would maybe want to change about your teenager, but we can't do that. All we can do is focus on you, and maybe there's some things that we could change about you that would, help to impact your teenager, and some
Mhm.
communication strategies that you could learn, or just kind of like some different ways of like being with your teenager that maybe would kind of cause a like the domino that knocks
Yeah,
over the other dominoes, that kind of like uh, allows those other changes that you are thinking about to just kind of occur more naturally. And then so then trying to kind of work backwards and figure out what's kind of the first domino that we can knock over, and together, and just kind of like try and set those other ones in motion.
totally. So I'm getting that a lot of the time, and I of course have seen this. The parent is not realizing that they are part of the environment that the kid lives in when the kid is doing something incorrectly.
Yeah,
And that is probably one of the hardest things ever to, because then the influences go both ways where the kids like, my parents don't do anything to help me with X, and the parents are like, why isn't my kid doing anything that I want to be done?
and also, I mean, like you're saying, the parent being part of the environment. So you have to realize that your kid is acting a lot differently with you than they probably are at school, and they probably are with their friends, and they probably are on their sports teams, and they probably are when they're online. And so you have to realize that the environment, it plays a huge role in how human beings behave. And yeah, you're a big part of that at home. So you have to recognize that, and maybe compensate for it a little bit.
Totally. I feel like that is one of the biggest things is the environment, but it's being home and understanding that at home it's the best environment and you can stay and thrive in that environment.
Yeah, hopefully, and I think it's if you don't have a home environment that kind of recharges you and refuels you, then it's really hard to you know meet the next day from like a place of balance and not being stressed. And that we kind of at least for me, I like really need some place to recharge after each day. And
Totally.
yeah, I think that's big.
So let's say we have a parent and they don't they're trying to put onto their kid what they think they should be like based on what they weren't like as a kid, because I know that
Yeah.
happens a lot. How do you handle that? How do you help a parent or someone understand that? Because this applies to everybody, of course, but for anybody, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest tools is like, um, if you can just change your mindset from from seeing your role as a parent as, hey, let me try to show you something. If you can change your role now that your kid's becoming a teenager, um, your role needs to shift a little bit to where you're more like a coach, and together you're going to kind of collaboratively explore, and you're going to kind of help and maybe offer suggestions. But at the end of the day, your teenager is going to need to figure out what their own identity is, and kind of the point of this process of of differentiation during the teenage years is for them, for the teenager to question your identity a little bit and to develop their own. So instead of kind of you trying to, I know it's hard, but like impose on your teenager your view, I would try to work on like some scripts that you could possibly use. Like, how could you start some conversations that would lead more to like, you trying to find out
Mhm.
what's what's big with your teenager, and what kind of identity are they developing, and what kind of big questions are they wrestling with. Because a lot of times, I study screenwriting in college,
Nice.
and I'm fascinated by storytelling. And one of the key ways that as a storyteller you can convey character is by those like critical important choices that the character makes when it comes down to the end of the line at the end of the day. And Batman, right, the city
Yeah.
and everything is on the line. He has to choose between the woman he loves and saving the city, what's he gonna choose, right? Like, and that is good storytelling. Now that you started talking about superheroes, I'm just rolling
Yeah.
with it, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
good storytelling because it forces us to say, uh, at the end of the day, when you have to make the final choice, that's what character is, and that and I think that we need to we need to give our teenagers those choices, and we need to support them in making those choices for themselves. But as a parent, if we can kind of get them to talk about those choices while they're making them, then we
Yep.
can maybe offer a little bit of guidance, not in a way to try to control them, because at the end of the day, if they don't feel like they made the choice for themselves, then they're never going to internalize it as their own identity. But if you can get them to kind of talk about the things that they're going through right now, then as a parent, you can kind of be more in that coach role. And that's really where you can have an issue. And so that's what I try to stress to parents is, what you're doing right now, your teenager is completely shutting you out. And that's why you
Mhm.
came to me, and because you recognize that. So if we could just change that a little bit and do it this way, it might not feel like, you're making as, directive an impact because you're not specifically saying, here's what you should do. But I really think at the end of the day, you're going to find that you have more of an impact this way.
Totally. And so what it seems like a bit is that egoic parenting versus the collaborative element of like, hey, let's grow together, or hey, I'm going to help
Mm,
you, and we're going to do it through a means of where you can actually help yourself. And once I feel like the kid learns that, then they can start to understand a lot more, and really they probably take on their whole life.
yeah, and I think it's hard because when they're younger, that is your role as a parent, and you do need to be more really showing them the ropes and showing them the rules. And it's not until they're 10, 11 that they're going to really start questioning why and wanting to kind of form their own identity more. So there's a shift that needs to happen, and a lot of it's not intuitive, I think, for parents to make that shift. And I attribute this to, like, um, 100,000 years ago, when
Yeah.
you're 12 years old, you would have left your family and you would already be starting a new family, and you have a 2-year-old kid on your shoulder. Like, so we now live in this environment where we're going through, becoming physically mature, and in the time of our life, when we're supposed to be like starting families of our own, but we're kind of like held hostage until the age of 18, trapped with our parents. And it's it's hard, and it's not really maybe a good fit for our brain development.
Totally. So it's almost, it's very interesting that you're saying as the parent progresses, their parenting needs to change based on the age of the kid. And I feel like that's something that most parents do not understand, because they're like, no, I've been parenting for 10 years. I've done it
Yeah.
all this way. Why do I have to change?
And because we never had to do it, you babies, there's like this classic way that people talk to babies, and it doesn't matter what country somebody is from, or if they're a male or a woman or anything, right? You put somebody in front of a baby and they go, oh, they start talking like this, and like their voice goes up,
Yeah.
and they start using more vowels, and the researchers have documented it. They call it parentage. It's an actual phenomenon that's cross culturally, universally, and that's because uh, we have had to care for babies forever in our evolutionary history. So we've evolved just natural instincts for how to care for a baby that are fundamental, that we all just have. But like I'm saying, for teenagers, we don't have those because teenagers were leaving the house when they were, 11 years old. This phenomenon of parents having a teenager, never existed. So
Yeah.
we're kind of like having to figure it out for ourselves, I think. And that's kind of part of the problem is that, like you're saying, you have to change parenting as your kids get older, and it's not intuitive, and people don't do it.
So then what happens when, say, your kid is growing up and he's becoming someone that you don't like? How do you handle that?
Mm. So that's placing a judgment on them is gonna make, at the end of the day, it's gonna be bad for your relationship. Like, it's gonna drive a wedge between you. So I think that the job of a parent is really unconditional love, and you need to come from a place of of unconditional support, and you definitely want to be able to voice, to not feel like you have to not say things. You want to be able to be vocal but still be supportive, and still saying, like, talking through the decision with your teen. You would probably say, hey, well, I don't know about this. That's such a good idea. I would maybe do it this way. But at the end, once they make the decision, and it's their decision to make, if they're an adult, um, you have to support it,
Yeah.
and you have to say, I hope it goes well. And and if it doesn't go well, you have to not say, I told you so. And I think that's important, right? You have to just, Dale Carnegie, one of the classic, of all
Totally.
time, in the 1920s, one of the key fundamentals to dealing with people is you have to let them save face, and I think parents don't do that enough. It, you don't need to do the "I told you so," like, just like, I think you just kind of, you make your case for your way of doing it, and then if they don't, that you don't need to say it. They know that, trust me, your kid recognizes that you said to do it that way, and they didn't do it that way, and it didn't go well. You don't have to rub it in,
Yeah.
right? Like, they got it. So there's a certain amount of that, just kind of like, I try to picture, like, the Dalai Lama, like, how would the Dalai, like, someone like super wise, like the Dalai Lama, parent, and it's more like, he would say, like, oh well, I'm not sure if that's a good way to do it,
Yeah.
but I guess the choice is yours to make. And if you want more advice about that, let me know, and I could give you some, because I really don't think that's a good idea. But at the end of the day, it's your call,
Yeah.
and if they do want more advice, and they say, well, wait a minute, wait, tell me more about that, then go for it. But I think we have to be careful about giving advice that people don't want, and parents, like, um, have to make that transition, to when your kid is 4, you tell them everything. But when they're 14, you say, well, would you like to hear a thought about that? Because there might be a better way to do that. And if they say no, I think you don't give it to them, because
Yeah.
giving, uh, their 14 is the top age for autonomy, according to studies. Actually, a need for
Really.
autonomy peaks at age 14. And if you're trying to force things down their throat that they don't want or that they didn't ask for, they're just going to bounce off their armor. Like, it's like a force field. And if a teenager, it doesn't want something, it's not going to get through. You know.
Totally. Wow. So now I know this probably comes up a lot as well. It's kids are in high school, they're getting towards the end, they try drugs, they try alcohol, like what you brought up earlier, like, oh, he has weed or something now. That progression and that mentality, I've always come to believe it's better to be completely open and be like, hey, like, if you do this stuff or if you're with someone, like, just let us know, because that's going to make the best out of it. But if you're a parent who strongly disagrees with what the kid is doing, how do you handle a situation where you're like, I don't agree with it, but I know that if I kind of push it under the rug, it's going to get worse?
Yeah. So, uh, it's actually, um, counterintuitive, but the research shows that the best attitude for a parent to have with regard to any kind of risk behaviors like drugs and alcohol is, uh, no tolerance. Don't do it. My attitude is that you shouldn't do that at all. However, uh, it's it's even more effective if the parents can do that and also have really open communication with the teenager, uh, about whatever the issue is.
Mm,
And when those two things combine, it's what's called a multiplicative effect, or a synergistic interaction
yeah.
that increases effects beyond what either of them is alone. And so it's a really, really powerful thing. So the answer is yes and yes. Both are important. So the key is how the how do you, um, say, my attitude is that I don't want you to do that, but also make your teenager feel like they can talk to you about it, and that they can, where these like skills that we're
Yep.
trying to teach are so important, and just like these communication skills. A big one is starting with empathy, is like starting with like, man, I know you must just think I am just like so out of touch, and I just like so don't get it. And even now, here I am, like, you just want to go out and play with your friends, and here I am like lecturing at you, and yammering away at stuff you just like totally don't care about. I get it, I get that. Like, and if you can start from a place of like saying whatever you think it is they're feeling, or man, you must just be thinking like, God, fuck you, mom. Like,
Yeah.
can't you get off my back like a little while and just like give me some freedom? Like, uh, when you can start with that kind of empathy, um, to where they feel like you understand where they're coming from a little bit, and say like, hey man, when I was a teenager, I get it. I wanted this one time. I'll tell you, man, I wanted this what a dress so bad, and my mom wouldn't let me get it because it was too scandalous. Oh man, I was so mad about that, but I saved up my money and I bought it anyway, and we had a big fight, whatever, and if you can tell your teenagers those kind of stories, hey, I totally get it. So I want to talk about it, and I want to work with you about it. And it's awkward, and it's like it's easier to just not talk about it. But I love you so much that I want to do it anyway, because it's important. And I want to be the kind of parent that you can talk to about this stuff. But I need you to know that I don't condone it, and I don't think it's okay. Um, and so you need to do both of those things as a parent,
Yeah.
I think. And when you can do that, you'll be more successful.
Awesome. So it's kind of, and I know there's a lack of this in most schooling, which is education behind these things, which we try to put under the rug. Sex, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. The more that
Yeah.
parents can educate their kids, one,
Oh,
they not only
absolutely.
trust their kids more, or their kids trust them more because they're like, wait, you were right. Like, that's crazy. But two,
Right.
it's like they need to know, because otherwise, like, America drinks, it's like through 18 to 21, we're the biggest alcoholics
Right.
in the whole world.
Sure. Or yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's a certain amount of stuff that you figure out on your own, but also a certain amount of stuff like, uh, do you want the first time your teen has thought about, what to do when they see cocaine to be when someone whips some out in the locker
Yeah.
room and is like, "Hey, do this like real quick," like, and they're like, "Ah, what?" Like, maybe it's good if you could, just like talk about it a little bit
Yeah.
beforehand, even the crazy stuff, and be like, "What would you do if this happened and this happened?" And just like go through some stuff with them, or talk about stuff from you, and maybe talk about how that would correspond to different values, or well, I guess, if you made this choice, that would mean you're kind of this kind of a person, or this kind of thing is more important to you. And if you made this choice, that would probably mean that that was more important to you. And kind of like helping teenagers to link choices, because link those like that's what the teenage brain is not very good at, is linking those like immediate
Hmm.
right now choices to those kind of like bigger picture, longer term things. So if you can kind of as a parent help to say, oh, so I guess what you're saying is, and get them to say it first is, oh, so then so what would happen if you did that? Oh, so kind of what you're saying is, and you have to do it in a
Yeah.
non-confrontational way. But what you're saying is that, like, if you chose that would mean you kind of were this kind of person, whereas if you chose that, really, it would mean that you're that kind of person, right? Like, and then they'll realize that, yeah, that is what I'm saying, and that it's coming from them, but that really, you kind of had to help them kind of make those links, and then when they're confronted with that choice, then they won't have to make those links again. Those links will have already been made. So now when
Hmm.
they're in the locker room and the kid whips out the cocaine, and they're thinking, they naturally go to thinking, oh, what kind of a person do I want to be? Do I want to be this
Yes.
kind of person who does this? And they wouldn't have been thinking that way if you hadn't have built those links beforehand. So I think a lot of it is, it's subtle, but it's neurolinguistic programming that you're doing as
Yep.
a parent, that you're literally creating those connections between things, so that when the kid finds themselves in that situation, they're thinking in the framework that you taught them, that you want them to be thinking into. And then ultimately it's their choice what type of person they want to be when they get put in that situation. But you also know what your family values are. And at the end of the day, I think, they're gonna make the right choice. And if not, then they're gonna learn the consequences, and maybe
Yep.
next time they will. And if not, we're gonna love them and support them anyway, and send them back out to try again.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly what you just said. The NLP, the neuro linguistic programming, you're doing it no matter what as a parent. So
Yeah, yeah.
because
Whether
they're
you know it or
mimicking you,
not.
yeah. So make it conscious. It's like with everything. It's like either you're parenting or you're just a bad parent and you're parenting wrong because you're always parenting. Like that's how it works.
Yeah, yeah.
Until the kid's becoming realized,
Anything you're doing or saying is um, being absorbed. Yeah.
which is also going back to the point prior to talking about the substances. It seems like helping your kid develop their identity can be one of the strongest elements, and it's not pushing your identity onto your child, but
Yep.
instead helping them develop it. Like, hey, have you thought about how you would act during this situation? Or, hey, what do you actually want to do in life? Because maybe college isn't right for you. There's all these preconceived
Yeah.
paths that we often think, and I think that's one of the biggest points that needs to be made.
Mm. Yep. Yep. So true, man. They just need to have something that they can find. They're gonna experiment with stuff and kind of like try on different like hats almost. Um, like I think during the teenage years we kind of try on different ways of being a little bit, at almost like costume elements, um, and just to see what works for us. And so kind of expect that, and uh, be okay with it. It might seem like your teenager's kind of like changing all the time, but think of it more like they're experimenting. I think because that's how we are. I mean, we're so sensitive to we start behaving in one way, and then if it's not working out for us, or if the results are bad, we don't keep doing it. We
Yeah.
modify it, right? If we're not getting the results that we thought we were going to get, we're just little like dopamine machines. And we're at the end of the day, like that's what it comes down to, I think. So, yeah, it's more like if your teenager's kind of not behaving in a way that's going to benefit them, then um, hopefully the consequences are going to emerge, right? Just
Yeah.
as a natural course of life. And I don't think you naturally necessarily as a parent have to do much to like make that happen, but you can kind of just support them in it. And when it doesn't go well, then be there to say, "Oh, sorry that it didn't, you know,
Yeah.
go well," and encourage them to go out and try it again. And whoa, what are you gonna try next, kind of thing. And I think that we're constantly doing that for all aspects of our identity. Like
Yep.
how do I want to be as a student? How do I want to be as a romantic partner? How do I want to be as a friend? How do I want to be as a member of this family, and this household and this school and all of these church or choir or whatever roles that we kind of see ourselves as being part of our identity. We maybe like experiment with different kinds of ways of being within these roles, and especially during the teenage years, and we see what the results are. And if they're good, if we can get, that's where kids kind of develop negative behaviors. If they realize they can get better results for kind of being a little bit putting in less effort, or being
Yep.
a little more like I don't care around their parents, then their parents start like catering to them or to try to get them to care more. And they're like, hey, wait a minute, all I have to do is like be like I don't care a little bit, and then my parents like start giving me more stuff and like
Yep.
giving me more attention. And so it's not necessarily that they really don't care more, it's that they just tried on that way of being a little bit, and the results that they found were, hey, this is good. So
Yep.
then they're going to keep doing that. So I think it's more, as a parent, if you could think of it as that, is they're kind of like constantly experimenting, and how can we make sure that the consequences that they're receiving at each little stage of experimentation are accurate, or an accurate representation of the consequences that they should be receiving for that stage, and then that they're not getting a false view of how easy something is, or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's we're feedback machines. And if we don't get the
Yeah,
proper feedback, then when we go into the real world, we're like, what the wait, it doesn't work anymore? This doesn't make sense.
yeah. I think like at the most fundamental level, that the human brain is just really good at yeah, recognizing patterns and creating, linking them in our brain, and start recognizing them, starting to expect them and anticipate them, and then build more on top of them. And so yeah, just like simple patterns and feedback, cycles of feedback. So for teenagers, it's like they want to, the more they can get more cycles of feedback and try out different things in their life, the faster they can find things
Hmm.
that are really cool, you know, and
Yeah.
that work well with who they want to be in the world.
Yeah. And ooh, there we go. And it goes both ways, because if you, I've seen parents who punish their kids for small things with huge consequences. How does
Mm,
that have a play on who the kid is and what they think about making a mistake or actually experimenting and then being punished for experimenting? So they're like, well, I can only be this one way, and they become repressed, because that's a
yeah,
very big thing.
yeah, it's harmful. Well, it's kids learn what they're kind of rewarded to do, and also I think that a lot of parents, tend to think that it's good to teach kids that you have to follow the rules in life, and that you're going to have to learn that you're going to work at a company someday, and you're going to have to do what the boss says, and that so my job as a parent is to kind of like teach those things to my kid. And so there's maybe a line as a parent, but to me, the conversation is you recognize as a parent that that's why you have those values, and you then have the conversation with your kid, and you then
Mhm.
say, uh, so look, you might not have this value at this time, but for me, what I found in my life is that it's really important uh, to to have these behaviors where if you had a job, you would be able to follow directions, and you would be able to you'd be organized. And so I have to punish you for not following directions and being disorganized as a parent, because I need to teach you this stuff. And I think if you actually talk to your kid about that, and
Mhm.
if you might decide that that's not important to you, and that's okay, but while you're living here, it's important to me, and I wouldn't feel like I was being a good parent if
Yeah.
I didn't teach you that and then instill that in you. And so I totally understand if you want to decide that's not important to you when you leave here, go for it and say, screw this, dad. I'm never doing this, right? But for
Yeah.
now, you live here, and to me, this seems like an important thing. And hey, if you can convince me that it's not an important thing, I'll listen.
Yes.
I'm not unreasonable, and so let's talk about it. Or that if you can convince me that these punishments aren't the best to teach you this value, that I mean, I'm transparent. I told you this is what I want you to learn. Is how to function in the world, how to function in a corporation, how to function in society, and know how to follow the rules, and stay organized and get things done on time and everything. So what should I do when don't you don't follow rules, or when you don't get things done on time, or when you fall behind, if you're disorganized? How should I, as a parent, help you to learn to do that? And just
Yeah.
having that conversation, I think, is really big. And a lot of times parents find that the kids come up with stuff that is actually, wow, that's great, and I wouldn't come up with that, but that's kind of more creative, or different, and actually that's more harsh than I would have said. But like, wow, let's go with that, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to do, I think.
Yeah. But exactly what you just said. And that is parents saying, hey, like, this will change. Like, what do you recommend? How will this work? When it comes to punishments, and taking out the, like, I want it to be this punishment because my dad did it when I was a kid, because
Right.
now that doesn't matter, number one. But number two, I have, this is just me, and it's my disdain for authority in reality, or at least authority that tells me exactly what to do, is that when people typically give punishments or capital punishments or anything like that, it's often based on only how they're being treated where they are now. And they're not realizing, in the grand scheme of things, how life doesn't operate the way that you think it does, because there's a billion different lives going on. So they're all operating differently.
Right.
And so that's where it gets really challenging, I think, as a parent, to go, like, hey, at my job, I'm getting punished because my boss is actually mad because he's getting punished from X. And so, like that chain of command is trading off and making you put it on your kid.
Uh, and then also just that then that becomes really real to you, that that's how the world works, that
Yes.
there's this chain of command and you have to like understand kind of your place in it. Whereas uh, maybe your kid's going to be an artist or an entrepreneur, or maybe they're not going to have the same experience that you have, and so
Hmm.
maybe the things that are important habits to you might not be important habits, and or might be harmful actually, later on in life for your teenager. So I think it's important to explain why you're teaching the things that you're teaching, so that it's not just arbitrary, but so that if uh, you know the kid then does find themselves in a situation later where that doesn't apply, whatever your assumption was,
Hmm.
um, they can modify it and not necessarily discard it, because there's probably still some wisdom in there that you've
Yep.
learned, over the course of your life. But they'll want to understand that the situation is different and maybe I should do it differently.
Totally. I love that. So I gotta ask, what is your higher leverage skill? And so a high leverage skill is something you can learn in any field, really. Pick it up, put it somewhere else, and then basically extrapolate it and be like, oh, that's okay, cool, this works here. So for example, learning to learn. Once you learn to learn, you can learn anything better. Learning to breathe better. Once you do that, then you can exercise better, you can meditate better. Pattern recognition. By learning pattern recognition, you can pick up and be like, oh, that goes there, that goes there. Oh, and it relates to that field this way. Is there anything that is a higher leverage skill that you've specifically utilized to help you get where you are today?
Yeah, I would say seeing connections that other people can't see, and like connections between things. I like read a lot. I read
Hmm.
like a few books a week. I do like just like tear through books. So and lots of different subjects. And I'll go through just different subjects and just read every book there is about it. And like so, I just kind of I guess I have like a, not necessarily that I'm like an expert in like lots of things, kind of just that I know like a little bit about like a
Yeah.
kind of certain like number of things, and then yeah, I guess I just am good at like seeing kind of connections between stuff, or new ways that stuff could uh, be combined. So not necessarily completely making something up,
Yeah.
but just kind of be combining things in a new way.
Have you heard of multi-potentialites?
No.
Okay, so this is just on another podcast. The guest uh, gave this to me, and he was like, "You sound like you're talking about multi-potentialites." And essentially, it's someone who takes the information from all these different areas and likes to relate them and look at things as a holistic system, or open system. And there's
Mm.
actually a whole group called, let me see, I have it in my notes, the Putty Tribe, and it's a group of people who like come together and share their thoughts and stuff.
Oh, that is cool. I gotta look it up.
Yeah, literally I was like, yeah, I just joined. I'm in no matter what. I don't know what I need
I'm
to do,
literally
but
navigating to the page right now.
yeah, seriously. No, that is awesome. And I think that skill itself, the ability to relate information, and essentially it's kind of reading without the intention of just it's reading with an open mind to other things that you've learned, and not going like, hey, this book
Mm.
is only about Civil War history. But like when you hear something and you're like, whoa, that's weird. That's just like the other book I was just reading when they talked about
Yeah,
this thing
yeah, right.
happened. And then they all just feed into each other. And you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. The world, all information connects. It's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing that I think is like in terms of studying educational psychology, they talk about the difference between like expert knowledge and novice knowledge, and uh, it's actually, they if they give like a test of pure facts to
Yep.
like someone who just got their PhD in a subject versus someone who's like a wizened professor of 40 years, uh, the person who just got their PhD actually scores a little higher on the test. It's just a fact. But difference is that the person who is the wizened professor for 40 years, they are much more able to like integrate
Mm,
those facts in new different ways, and their knowledge, it turns out, is a lot more interconnected,
yeah.
much more richly. So they have kind of a similar sized network, of knowledge, but it's just much more richly interconnected. And so I think about that often in terms of like, how long it takes to get to the point where you have the amount of knowledge of an expert, but then how much to get to the point where you really are like a true expert is the point where you have the interconnected knowledge,
Yep.
and it's a big difference. And so I guess, yeah. So I think about that, and like what as you're like you were saying that, you were saying as you kind of like hear things or read new things, like associating them with
Yep.
previous things, that is like, one of the best ways, for, yeah, helping to like, create a more interconnected, um, uh, knowledge web than you would have otherwise. Like, because what you're doing by consciously thinking about how the things that you're learning are connected to things you already know is
Yep.
you're creating more interconnection. And so you're kind of creating more expert knowledge. And so, yeah, so I just, like you said, I try to do that whenever I'm reading things, is create those extra, retrieval cues and interconnections to things that I already kind of, and just kind of like ponder it a little bit and think about, how it relates to other stuff, instead of just like breezing through to the next page and starting the next chapter immediately. Like, I think it's worth it to take that little extra time and just kind of like think about it. And
Yeah.
thinking is like a thing that seems to be kind of like getting lost these days almost,
Yep.
because it's so easy to just whip out your phone, or I don't know, but, I do enjoy sometimes just, you know having some time to just kind of think about something that I just read, or just go for a run for, 15 minutes without
Yeah.
bringing anything electronic, and just like, think. It's important, I think.
Totally. Yeah. I wrote a whole article on how to use wasted time, like quote unquote wasted time, so like appointments, all that stuff. And like
Uh,
one of the main things I said was like, you can use this time to actually think, and like use the time when you're like, no, I just can't think about that right now. As many people say nowadays, now you can. You have that time. You're just sitting there. You're just doing something. Like,
yeah,
go deep down the rabbit hole, figure it out, have fun with it. Like, you should. That's what life's about. Find connections, create, have fun.
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So is there anything right now that you're currently questioning? And this can be life, religion, politics, how doorknobs work, whatever it is. It's something that in common consensus you hear people say, yeah, that's the way it works. And you're like, I just really don't think it works that
Oh, wow, so many things.
way.
Um, I don't know about that one.
Could be anything.
Hmm. I guess I'm just always thinking about like our myths about what makes us happy, or what makes
Hmm.
people fulfilled, or what's a good life, or what's the right life. And, it's interesting to see. Um, it's interesting to see uh, what we kind of strive for, and like, I like reading people's biographies, because a lot
Yeah.
of times a lot of times it's like a different thing that, that it is. A lot of times it's like, wealth, or status in a certain, or a gold medal, or, you know um, some sort of a thing, and, and people kind of like, uh, ultimately then find it, and then find kind of like, uh, find what their what their truth is, or what their happiness is,
Hmm.
and it's like, then I think it's a thing we take away from that is like, oh well, you could have just found, you didn't have to do all that work, you could have just found it, like, from the beginning, if you would. But uh, I question that, I think,
Yeah.
because I think that the journey of actually,
Mm.
I think that what we need is just something to conquer, you know
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like the classic, again, I guess going back to my storytelling roots is Joseph Campbell, you know,
Yep. Yep.
was the researcher who like broke down what all the like best stories in the world had in common, and it's just like classic art that if you watch movies in Hollywood and talking about superheroes, they all follow this like to the T, the hero's journey cycle, which is a young hero who has kind of a call to adventure and is kind of like has to make a choice of whether they will answer the call, stay in their normal life, and always wonder what could have been, or
Hmm.
answer the call and set out onto the adventure. And so, of course, the hero chooses to set out, but then, of course, they endure hardships, and it's not as easy as they thought, and many failures. And just when they're about to give up and all hope looks lost, there's a wise
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
sage someone who reaches out and gives them just the right piece of advice at just the right time. And they get through that. And then they get through the next thing. And then they get through the next thing. And finally they get to the very end where it all comes down to the thing on the line and they make the final ultimate choice and they triumph. And then they, return home a changed person. And it's just the classic. Then, at the end, there's a final beat at the end
Yep.
where they then return home and there's a scene that mirrors a scene that we saw in the beginning of the film. And in this scene, they have to make a choice that they also had to make at the beginning of the film. But this time, the changed hero, after returning home, now makes the right choice. And they do it
Yeah.
differently. And we see in the final beat of the film that they have changed. And the arc is complete. And that's the hero's journey. And I think that we all need that in our lives. And I think that the reason that we see it repeated over and over again, and we like to read these biographies of these people, and these people say, "Oh, well, I finally figured it out, and man, let me tell you the answer so that you don't have to go through all that, and here it is, so you don't have to do all that work." I think that's bullshit.
Yep.
I think that no one can tell you it without you having to do it. You got to find your Mount Everest. And today, it doesn't even fucking matter what it is. I think you just got to choose something and say, I am going to conquer this thing.
Yep.
And it's going to ideally choose something that's going to take you about 4 years or something. Do it in your 20s and just get it over with, and just knock something out and just crush it. And I think that we need that in our life. And when you just look at the lives of the people that are quote unquote good lives, like they all have that, right? They
Yes.
conquered something and did something meaningful, and so whatever it is, like you're passionate about something, right? um, uh, Choose something really hard that you don't know if you can do, and do it, and fail at it, and that's cool too.
Yeah.
And I think then a lot of these people that we admire, it's the fifth thing that they try, and so recognize that, like, so go try to do the thing that you think you want to do, but recognize that that's probably not the thing that you really are meant to do. That's just this first thing that you're supposed to do. So I would just say get out and do it, and uh, start.
Yeah. No, that's great. Uh, the just the fact of the story arc and what it is so important. And I think if you try to strip that from people, that's the moment that things actually go wrong. No, so we were just talking about the story arc, the hero's journey, and how if you strip that from
Yeah,
someone,
yeah, right.
that quite literally removes so much from who they are, the journey, and the evolution of themselves in their own mind.
Yeah, because what is you? I mean, I'm so interested in identity and
Hmm.
what is, like, the you-ness of you, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I've read thousands of studies. I'm a psychologist, so I'm fascinated by this. But we don't really know,
Yeah.
and it's a combination of your identity and your values, but it's also, I think, that there's this important aspect of your story that kind of we don't really have a tangible way to really research, but you need to have a strong story that you are the center of, and that you're um, that 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 is not a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain structure of stories that end well, and there's a certain structure of stories that don't end well. And so if you realize that when you tell your story of your life, and I know people like this,
Yeah.
that when you talk to them, they have like a negative life story, or a story that they're kind of like this victim. Um, of just kind of things happening to them
Yeah.
rather than them being like, as a writer, and especially in sitcoms, we talk about having a reactive versus a proactive central character. Um, so um, a lot of uh, like the classic just like sitcoms where kind of like nothing happens. It's like really like Seinfeld or whatever. It's really
Yeah.
reactive, right? It's just like, oh no, nothing ever happens, and like stuff just happens, and like they just stumble into it, and they just like have to deal with it or whatever. Like, whereas any whatever one of these like epic kind of like ones where they're on like a quest, obviously there's like a proactive protagonist that's trying to like accomplish something. But
Yeah.
I think we need a narrative for ourselves that's proactive. If you have a narrative for yourself that involves things happening to you, you're kind of being a victim of them, and it's not benefiting you. Then
Yeah.
you're not going to like live from a place of empowerment. So you need to then kind of figure out how to restructure that narrative a little bit into a more positive story structure. And I mean, someone who's a writer could like easily help you out. Like it's just certain beats that you just got to hit, and every story hits them the same way. And we could just restructure your life story a little bit to like hit those beats in the
Yeah.
way that you're retelling it. It would change, your perception of yourself, I think, a lot. And
Yeah.
big positive thing.
Yeah. I talk about that all the time is you need to write your own story. Go back, take the beginning of your life, reframe it, because every time you remember something, you remember it differently, number one. But number
Yeah,
two, if it's not structured already to the way you want it to be to set you up for your future, then why are you even remembering all this bad shit? Like, go back, reframe it, write it like it's a hero's journey, or like you're the kid and right now is the time where you're about to like burst out of your shell and get to where you want to go. And you will, because you now are that person in your mind, in your reality.
yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. So is there anything that you're currently obsessed with?
Oh man. Well, I mean, green tea. It's kind of like that's kind of
What
always
kind?
the thing. All kinds. I like jasmine green tea a lot. Um, yeah. For some reason, yeah, I'm big on that. It's good kind of all morning long working and stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, before we sign off, where can people find you?
Yeah, we're at talkingtoteens.com, and that's the Talking to Teens podcast. You can find us there on iTunes, Talking to Teens podcast. And it's sort of like this. We just interview different experts about really focusing on how to talk to teenagers, and how what you could say in different situations to teenagers to kind of get through to them about different things and get make positive results in their life. And so I kind of think of it like um, uh, it's like hacks for parents.
Yeah.
It's like stuff that's like a little stealthy that's based in psychology and science because I'm big on that. And we bring in a lot of best-selling authors and pretty cool people. We just had Chris Voss recently, author of Never Split the Difference, and the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did this like really cool piece on how to negotiate stuff with your teenager. Um, so we try to do kind of cool stuff like that and make it happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was awesome.
Hey, it was my pleasure, really. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man.